She had signed up for this challenge, thinking he would be the one she'd face. But let's be real, this victory doesn't mean much. Hain really wanted to impress Jin-Woo by defeating someone who could control that giant ant's powers. Jin-Woo thought it over for a moment, then nodded. "Bro," he said. Out of nowhere, a shadowy figure appeared behind him. This soldier was completely covered in swirling smoke. Hain took a step back as she saw the shadow ant. Its energy was super scary, just like before. Jin-Woo looked really worried about her, because her face had gone pale. "Are you okay?" he asked. Even though Baru wasn't as strong as before, he was still a dangerous creature meant to kill hunters. Hain pressed her lips into a thin line and nodded silently. She watched as Baru turned to Jin-Woo and bowed. "My king, what should I do with this human?" Baru seemed to ask without saying a word. Hain kept watching, almost as if she could hear their silent conversation too. Jin-Woo sent his reply silently to Baru. Defeat her without harming her. Then Baru nodded, ready to follow Jin-Woo's command. Across from him stood Hain, her eyes wide with fear. She had never felt such a strong wave of magic power before. It made her skin tingle all over. Jin-Woo managed to defeat this monster, she thought, amazed. But now, facing Baru, she was trembling like a leaf. Baru cracked his knuckles and let out a fierce roar. Aska are double. His sharp claws glinted in the light, but Jin-Woo shot him a warning look. "No claws," Jin-Woo said firmly. Baru grinned, his claws disappearing instantly. He was ready to fight and win. Jin-Woo gave the order one last time. "Hurt her, and you'll regret it."
Dior nodded.
"I understand your command."
With Baru ready, Jin-Woo shouted, "Begin." Baru moved first. He had one clear instruction: defeat the enemy without harming her. As someone used to giving orders, Baru knew exactly what Jin-Woo wanted: overwhelm her with strength and crush her will to fight. Bruce Lean. In a flash, Hain lost track of Baru. Then, he was right in front of her. She gasped, stunned by his speed. But her instincts kicked in fast. With a quick swing of her sword, she struck him before he could react.
Hain swung at Baru again and again, but he didn't budge. Every attack missed, whether it was fast or slow, high or low. Baru stayed right where he was, not taking a single step back. His moves were so sharp and quick, but it looked like there were multiple copies of him blurring around. The difference in their power was obvious. Hain couldn't believe her eyes. How could he dodge everything without moving an inch? She tried again, but it didn't make any difference. Kyun went for her opponent's neck, but he dodged effortlessly by leaning back just a little. No matter how she swung or switched up her moves, he slipped out of the way like it was nothing. She was stunned. How was this possible? Baru wasn't even a real magic beast. He was just a minion, using the leftover powers of one that had died. How could he be so strong? And how strong is Jin-Woo if he can control this minion so easily? Hafese had started to slow down as a growing fear gripped her. Rafa took advantage of the momentary hesitation, and casually swatted her sword swings aside with the back of his hand. Then, he leaned in close, right in her face. Hafefe's Alin was shocked by the overwhelming stench of death that suddenly filled her nose. "It's over," she thought. As Barafe's wide-open mouth filled her vision, she let out a terrified scream. Ah! Instead of crushing her head with his jaws, the minion unleashed a deafening roar. Scrafez. The force of Barafe's roar sent Hafez flying backward. Eek! Jin-Woo winced at the sight. The fight was so one-sided that it wasn't fun to watch anymore. But then Hain stood up again, gripping her sword tightly, as if she had no plans to give up. Jin-Woo raised an eyebrow in confusion. What was going through her mind? Hain wasn't the type to ignore obvious weakness. She knew when a fight was too tough. She wasn't foolish enough to charge into a battle she couldn't win. So why was she still fighting? Through his connection with Baru, Jin-Woo could feel how much the Shadow Ant wanted to destroy everything. Hain was still as determined as ever, even though things weren't going in her favor. Jin-Woo watched the fight with a worried look on his face. He felt like something bad was about to happen. Baru couldn't figure out why Hain wouldn't give up. He had already shown her how much stronger he was, so why keep fighting? To him, it didn't make sense. The king of the ants, who sat at the top of the food chain, grew annoyed. Here was this human girl, someone far weaker than him, refusing to back down. It was like she was just a toy to him, but she wasn't acting like it. Baru's anger flared up like a wildfire. fueled by memories of her time as a top dog in power. Who did Hasten think she was? Baru popped up right in front of her, leaned in close, and locked eyes. In that moment, it was clear who was boss, and who wasn't. Hasten's instincts should have been screaming at her to back down. Baru had a plan, scare Hasten so badly that she'd lose the will to fight. She wanted to tap into Hasten's survival instincts, make her feel like prey, but it didn't work. Just as Jin-Woo had guessed, Hasten still had a trick up her sleeve. Hein was super confident with her sword dance move. She started swinging her sword faster and faster, slicing through the air like she was performing an epic dance. The blade sparkled as it zoomed around, creating sharp clangs with each hit. But Baru wasn't having it anymore. His face turned serious as he blocked each strike with his claws. Enough! Baru shouted, clearly annoyed. With a quick grab he caught the sword mid-swing and snapped it in half. The blade broke with a loud crack, leaving only part of it intact. Despite the failure, Emma's eyes burned with icy anger. She knew this was her only chance. Summoning all her remaining magic, she focused on the broken sword in her hand. This was a special skill called the Sword of Light, something she had never used before. It drained too much magic, so she'd saved it for a desperate moment like this. The blade glowed brightly, shining like gold. Baru, thinking he'd already won, had let his guard down. Hamid didn't hesitate. She leaped forward and plunged the glowing sword into his side. Jin-Woo watched in shock, unable to react in time. No, he shouted, but it was too late. Breath, at a deafening screech. Aska Ore. Emmet in that split second. One thought flashed through his mind. She's the enemy. He wasn't worried about dying. What terrified him was being beaten by her. But if he fell, this woman's sword would be aimed straight at his king. And with that, a powerful instinct took over, one that every shadow soldier had deep in their bones. It was the rule they lived by. Protect my master. Baru's mind went blank, and Jin-Woo's order to defeat the enemy without harming her vanished from his memory, like it never existed. Baru went through a super scary change to protect his master. His body got bigger, and his jaws became as strong as steel. He even grew sharp claws. Stop. Baru was ready to use his 10 razor-sharp claws to protect the king from Heian. Swipe. Just as Baru's claws were about to hit Heian, thud, Jin-Woo jumped in just in time, saving the day. I said stop. Jin-Woo's voice was firm as he glared at Baru. He gripped both sets of claws tightly with his bare hands, his muscles tense. Baru shook with fear, his eyes locked on Jin-Woo's. Without even pulling the sword out of his stomach, he jumped back and fell flat on the ground, face down. My king, please have mercy on me, he pleaded. Jin-Woo understood why Baru had acted this way. His instincts to protect his master had screamed so loudly in Jin-Woo's mind. But for now, Jin-Woo just frowned at him, then turned away. Thud. Hakranj dropped to the floor, completely drained after facing death. Even if only for a moment. Are you okay? Jin-Woo asked, walking over to him. Hakranj tried to sit up, but gave up halfway, too tired to move further. She stared at the floor and nodded. Yes. But she didn't sound very sure. Jin-Woo helped her up and asked, why are you pushing yourself so hard? Do you really need to join our guild that badly? She didn't answer. The truth was, this wasn't just a test. It was more like a challenge designed to keep her out. But she'd been so determined to win that she'd risked using a super dangerous skill. This couldn't just be about wanting to win. Jin-Woo asked carefully, not wanting to upset her. Do you like me or something? Hein looked stunned, as if someone had just slapped her. Jin-Woo shrugged. So that's not it either. Then Hein took a moment to gather her thoughts before answering. Yes, I think so. Meanwhile, at the Hunter Command Center in the US, the director wasn't happy when he heard his team failed to bring Jin-Woo on board. In the director's office, he was eagerly waiting to hear the details directly from the assistant director instead of reading a report. The assistant director walked in with Norma, and before they could even sit down, the director asked, what happened? This was surprising because no one had ever turned down a recruitment offer involving Norma at the Hunter Command Center before. Michael stood there looking gloomy, his head bowed low. Michael looked at Norma nervously. I'm really sorry, sir. The director waved his hand dismissively. That's not why I called you here. With a press of a button, the office door locked, and the glass walls fogged up. Now the room was completely soundproof. No chance of anyone overhearing their conversation. They had been super careful to keep Norma's situation under wraps, avoiding phones or emails that might leak details. Even now, the director wasn't totally sure what had gone down in Korea. He turned to Michael and asked sharply, "What happened over there?" She nodded slowly, and then Michael spoke up. Mrs. Sellner watched Hunter Sung, and what did she see? The director knew how powerful Norma was, so her opinion mattered just as much as their recruitment efforts. Michael wiped his dry lips before answering. According to Mrs. Sellner, Hunter Sung is a king. The director's eyes widened in shock. Out of all the strong hunters Norma had met, she'd only called 3 of them kings. This was huge. The best of the best hunters, each was so strong, they could change the world. Jin-Woo had just joined this small group of super powerful hunters. The director looked at Norma. "Does this mean Hunter Sung is as strong as a national-level hunter?" he asked. Norma shook her head. The director frowned, confused. Michael understood why the director was reacting that way. He had felt the same shock earlier. Norma sighed. "I need to explain," she said, diving right in. "I know you both know what I can do," Norma said with a smile. The director and the assistant director both nodded at the same time, like they were in sync. "You mentioned before that people who have awakened can connect to some kind of power from another side," the director said curiously. Norma nodded. "Exactly. When I look into their eyes, it's like I get a peek through a secret door. That's how I find the link that ties them to this other place." Sometimes the passage would light up so brightly. It was almost blinding because the energy flowing through it was super strong. These moments were what people called kings. Then someone asked, "What's different about Hunter Sung?" Norma looked scared as she answered, "He doesn't have a special link." She shivered and continued, "When I looked into his eyes, the darkness there stared right back at me." Whoa. It was like staring into pure darkness, Norma said, her voice filled with intensity. The assistant director countered, "But he helps a lot of people as an active hunter. I don't think he's evil." If that were true, Jin-Woo could have easily taken down the 2 agents, who pointed their guns at him. Yet, he chose to let it go without a fight. Norma shook her head firmly, her expression serious and unwavering. "This isn't about whether Hunter Sung is a hero or villain," Norma said. "I'm talking about where his power comes from." The director, who had been sitting quietly with his chin in one hand, finally spoke up. "But you're sure he's super strong, right?" Norma nodded. "Hunter Sung doesn't get his power from somewhere else. His strength comes from inside him, not some other place. That means there's nothing holding him back. He can be as powerful as he wants." Michael felt a chill run down his spine as he blurted out, "His power has no limits." He couldn't believe what he was saying. Jin-Woo's potential seemed endless. The director listened thoughtfully, then nodded as if making a big decision. "Thanks, Mrs. Sellner," he said, and after Norma left, he turned to his assistant. "Let's head downstairs." "Where exactly?" the assistant asked curiously. "Sublevel 9. You mean that filing room with all the documents?" The director gave a sly smile as they stepped into the elevator. "There's more down there than just papers. If Mrs. Sellner's skill won't bring him here, we'll need to find something else that will." Jin-Woo was super young but packed a ton of power. If he was as crazy strong as Norma said, it didn't matter if his power came from light or darkness. A knife used for self-defense would still look like a weapon to others. The director had one goal in mind, to get his hands on a knife called Jin-Woo Sung. As he stepped into sublevel 9, he unlocked the door and walked right in. Some employees said hello as he passed by, but he didn't even bother to reply. "Do you remember the first S-rank gate?" he asked, sharply. Michael sure did. How could anyone forget that terrifying dungeon break that caused chaos across the western United States? In an epic quest, the government offered a huge reward to the world's top hunters to take down the boss of a super dangerous S-rank gate, and they pulled it off. But here's the kicker, only a handful of hunters made it out alive. Can you believe it? One massive magic beast wiped out dozens of the best hunters on the planet. If those brave survivors hadn't stepped up, the entire country might have been destroyed forever. The country gave those 5 hunters all the rights and powers it had, basically making them as powerful as the nation itself. This was how the term national-level hunter came about. The director spoke up, saying the name of a magical beast that had caused the worst disaster ever, Kamish the dragon. Some say Kamish means an undying flame, and it sounded just as terrifying as it did legendary. The director then went into the last room on that floor, opened a safe and pulled out a rune stone that was locked up super tight. Michael couldn't believe his eyes. What was this thing doing here? Is that? Someone asked. Someone asked, their voice full of excitement. Yes, it is, the director replied with a grin. He gently placed his hand on the sleek glass case in front of him. This right here is the runestone from Kamish's remains. As after Kamish was defeated, 2 national-level hunters decided to stay in the United States. It felt almost like a final gift from Kamish himself. The United States set up something called the Hunter Command Center after a terrible event 8 years ago. They worked hard to make hunters stronger so that tragedy wouldn't happen again. Back then, there were no top-level mage hunters left, so Kamish's special runestone was stored in a cold basement at the command center, waiting for the right person to find it. The director looked at the glass box with a knowing smile. Kamish is gonna give this country another amazing gift, he said. Meanwhile, at the Knights Guild, Jong-soo, the guildmaster, was already in a bad mood when he got to work. Boss, I heard yesterday that getting the permit for the gate might be tough, he said. Yoon-tae, the vice master, quickly stepped in to explain what was going on. This association's evaluation came out higher than they expected. Is it an S-rank gate? No. But it's a max level A rank. What a hassle. S-rank gates were no big deal. They could handle those easily. But here's the thing. The Knights Guild didn't have any S-ranked hunters on their team, so tackling an S-rank gate was totally out of the question for them. Jeju Island had already made it clear that taking on something like that would require every single S-rank hunter in South Korea, but A-rank gates, that was a different story altogether. The Knights were one of the top 5 guilds, but people would definitely start talking if they couldn't handle an A-rank gate. The guild was already in a tough spot, and failing this could make things even worse. What are we gonna do? Boss, someone asked. I'm not sure yet, came the reply. If we don't take the gate, the Fame Guild will grab it for sure. Mentioning the Fame Guild made Jong-soo's eye twitch. He hated hearing about them. This gate is on our turf, and you want to just hand it over to Dongwook Ma. He snapped. I'm just saying. The other person defended. Over my dead body. Jong-soo's anger boiled over, and he bit his lip hard enough to hurt. It was obvious why he shouldn't say anything when he was this upset. With his guild members' lives at stake, blurting something out could be dangerous. He could feel a headache brewing, and the tension made it harder to keep quiet. Our A-rank hunters are just as skilled and numerous as those from larger guilds. In fact, they're comparable to the Hunters Guild, which is the best in Korea. The Knights Guild was facing a tough challenge. They were on the edge of disaster because they didn't have any S-rank hunters. This shortage could knock them out of the top 5 guilds entirely. Their elite members were strong enough to handle regular A-rank gates, but things got dicey when the magic power spiked. These super tough gates were almost as dangerous as S-rank ones. Even though they were labeled as A-rank, without an S-rank hunter, tackling these high-stakes missions could be deadly for their team. So why was the Hunters Association undecided about giving them the raid permit? Well, if the gate turned red, it would be a disaster. Jong-soo kept thinking hard, trying to figure things out. Then Yoon-tae spoke softly. Boss, we're in big trouble if this becomes a red gate. Jong-soo nodded. You're right. A regular upper A-rank gate was dangerous enough. But if it turned red, that would mean monsters pouring out non-stop, and no way to stop them. The idea was terrifying. If they got lucky, maybe only half the group would make it through. But if things went wrong, everyone, including Jong-soo, could die. It made sense to walk away, but backing down from an A-rank mission would come with a price. Their fate would be sealed if people found out they gave up such a critical task. Who would want to join a guild that doesn't have an S-rank hunter and can't even beat an A-rank gate? Maybe we could team up with another guild.
Jonks shook his head. Why would they help us when everyone knows we're struggling on our own?
Especially since other guilds could just take the gate for themselves without any trouble. Even if they found another guild willing to help, there's still a big problem. They'd look incompetent in front of everyone. The two men grew more worried until a voice cut through their worries. If not another guild, then what about just asking one person? They heard from across the room. They turned to see Yiren Jung, an A-rank healer, and one of the best in the business, walking toward them with confidence. Healers had a lot of influence when it came to raids, especially if they were A-rank with skills like Yiren. But Jong-soo was struggling. He couldn't hide how helpless he felt. With the Knights Guild's fate on the line, we're heading into an A-rank gate. He started to say, so what good would one per? Jong-soo stopped mid-sentence. Suddenly a face flashed in his mind. A man who could take down, not just A-rank monsters, but even S-rank ones, all by himself. Jong-soo couldn't sit still, he was that excited, and literally popped up from his seat. Imagine if Jin-Woo's son came with us on the raid. Wouldn't that be awesome? This guy once took down a monster that even top S-rank hunters struggled with, and he did it like it was nothing. With him by our side, our whole team would be super safe, no worries at all. And that wasn't all. The Knights Guild wouldn't have to deal with the embarrassment of asking another guild for help. Plus, this plan would actually make the Knights Guild look better. There's no catch here. It's a win-win situation. Not only would it save the lives of their team members, but it would also bring back the honor of the Knights Guild. Talk about getting two great results with one move. Jong-soo's eyes lit up as he asked excitedly, "What's Hunter's Sung been up to lately?" But neither Yurim, who had come up with this idea in the first place, nor Yoon-tae, who had been quietly listening, knew much about him. Other than that time, he cleared that mysterious gate that suddenly appeared in the middle of the road. "He's been pretty quiet," Yoon-tae said, recalling something he'd seen on the news a while back. He pulled out his phone. "Should I look up his contact info, boss?" he asked, excitedly. His friend shook his head. "Don't bother." "Why not? We can't handle something this big over the phone," his friend said firmly. "We need to talk to him face to face." Jong-soo's eyes lit up. "Got it," he said, grinning at Yoon-tae. "Road trip to Seoul, buddy." That night, Hae-in snuggled under her blanket, cringing at the memory of her earlier awkward moment. "I think so, Cass," she muttered to herself, face palming. "Yeah, real smooth, Hae-in." Did I really say, "I think so"? That was practically admitting everything. She squirmed around for a moment, but then froze as an idea hit her. But then, what was Hae-in supposed to make of Jin-Woo's answer? At that point, isn't there a better way to fix this than joining the guild? She had said earlier to escape the conversation. Hae-in's mind went blank every time she thought about that terrifying moment. Her face turned red as the memory popped into her head again. When Hae-in had stared into the wild eyes of the giant minion, she'd felt like there was no escape, like death was unstoppable. She'd felt a deep dread for what might happen next. As the minion's claws came at her from both sides, Hae-in had squeezed her eyes shut tight. But then, she felt something warm behind her, and a familiar scent wrapped around her like a blanket. She slowly opened her eyes and turned her head to see Jin-Woo standing there. He was gripping the minion's claws, his face fierce with anger. Her heart raced at the sight of him, saving her once again. "However, I have to ask, do you have a thing for me or something?" Hae-in wondered if she had cheated by asking that question in that moment. She shook her head hard, as if trying to push away the thought. Even if Jin-Woo had asked, she shouldn't have answered honestly. He might think she was weird, but it just slipped out. She hadn't meant to say it. Hae-in had told herself to stay quiet, but before she knew it, her mouth was already open. It happened because she felt so comfortable around him, like she wasn't even herself. Wait, what does that mean? She thought about it for a moment. For some reason, the words "I'm not myself" seemed familiar. But where had she heard them before? Hae-in tried to remember, but couldn't quite place it. Then something strange happened. A memory she didn't know, she had popped into her mind. "Please tell him." The voice was faint and far away, like a whisper from a long-forgotten dream. Hae-in sat up straight, her heart racing. Who said that? And what were they asking her to tell him? She tried to dig deeper into the memory, but it stayed just out of reach. All she could grasp was the feeling that this had happened, not so long ago. The voice echoed in her mind again. Please tell him. But Hae-in still didn't know whose voice it was, or what the message was about.